On a cold winter morning, Margaret was enjoying the peace and quiet of her little home when a faint, desperate bark echoed from the woods behind her house. Curiosity led her outside, and what she saw would change her life forever. A weary golden retriever, thin and exhausted, stood before her with 8 tiny puppies shivering in the freezing air. Why were they here, and what had driven this brave mother to bring her puppies to Margaret's door? The answer will leave you in tears. Winter in the small town of Minnesota wrapped everything in a thick blanket of snow. The world seemed to be frozen in time, with icicles hanging from rooftops and snowflakes drifting lazily from the sky. In her small, weathered house at the edge of the forest, Margaret lived alone. Margaret, 70 years old, had grown accustomed to the quiet. Widowed nearly a decade ago, she had learned to fill her days with small routines. Her home, though modest, carried the warmth of her memories. Framed photographs of her late husband and children lined the mantel above the fireplace, their smiles frozen in time. A rocking chair by the window was her favorite spot, where she would knit scarves or read old books while the forest stretched endlessly outside. Life moved slowly, predictably for Margaret. Each morning began with a steaming cup of tea and the rhythmic crackle of the fireplace. She found peace in the little things, tending to her garden in the warmer months, baking simple breads, and occasionally exchanging a few words with the mailman, one of the few visitors to her secluded home. Despite her independence, loneliness often crept in, especially on long winter nights when the wind howled through the trees. Margaret missed the days when her house was alive with the laughter of family, but she had made her peace with the solitude. On this particular morning, Margaret wrapped her hands around a mug of tea, watching the snowflakes dance outside her frosted window. The forest behind her house stood tall and silent, its trees laden with snow. The serenity of the scene always brought her a sense of calm. But today, that calm was interrupted. A faint sound broke through the quiet, a bark, weak and uneven. Margaret set her tea down, her brow furrowing as she listened intently. The sound came again, this time more distinct, carrying an air of desperation. "What could that be?" she murmured, pulling her woolen shawl tightly around her shoulders. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then decided to investigate. She slipped on her thick boots and coat, bracing herself for the biting cold. As she stepped outside, the chill hit her cheeks, sharp and unforgiving. The bark echoed again, faint but insistent, coming from the forest's edge. Curiosity mixed with concern as Margaret trudged through the snow, her boots crunching with each step. She scanned the trees, her breath visible in the frosty air. As she neared the source of the sound, she noticed movement near a cluster of bushes. "Hello," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The rustling stopped. Margaret held her breath as a figure emerged from the bushes. Her first thought was that it was a stray dog, but as it stepped into the open, her heart sank. It was a golden retriever, but its appearance was heartbreaking. Its fur, once golden and radiant, was dull and matted, clinging to its thin frame. Its ribs were visible beneath its coat, a testament to its hunger. Yet it wasn't alone. Following close behind were 8 tiny puppies, barely able to walk in the deep snow. They stumbled and tripped, their small bodies shivering with each step. The mother dog looked at Margaret, her amber eyes filled with exhaustion, but also something else. Hope. Margaret stood frozen, her heart breaking at the sight. The mother dog seemed to summon all her remaining strength to push forward, her gaze locked on Margaret's. It was as if she was pleading, not with words, but with a raw, silent desperation. Margaret's voice trembled as she whispered, "Oh, you poor thing, what happened to you?" The golden retriever took a step closer, cautious but determined. Her puppies huddled together behind her, too weak to move further. Margaret knelt slowly, her gloved hands trembling as she reached out. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth. "I'm here to help." The mother dog didn't flinch, standing her ground as if she understood the kindness in Margaret's voice. The snow swirled around them, and Margaret's heart raced as she realized the weight of the moment. These lives, so fragile, were now in her hands. The mother dog took one more step forward, her eyes never leaving Margaret's. It was a look Margaret would never forget, one of trust, vulnerability, and the purest plea for help. Margaret stood in the snow, her heart pounding as she looked at the mother dog and her 8 tiny puppies. The sight of their frail bodies shivering in the cold left no room for hesitation. She knew she couldn't leave them out here, not in this merciless winter. "It's okay," Margaret murmured softly, reaching her hand toward the mother dog. "You're coming with me." The mother dog seemed to understand. Slowly, she nudged the closest puppy toward Margaret, as if entrusting her little one to this stranger. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears at the dog's silent gesture of trust. Without wasting another moment, Margaret removed her scarf and carefully wrapped it around 2 of the smallest puppies to keep them warm. She picked up the others one by one, cradling them gently in her arms. The mother dog followed closely, her tired eyes never leaving Margaret's face. Back at the house, Margaret opened the door wide and ushered them in. The puppies, too weak to react, simply huddled together on the floor near the fireplace. The mother dog stood protectively over them, her body trembling but steadfast. Margaret quickly sprang into action. She grabbed an old quilt from her linen closet and spread it out near the hearth, creating a makeshift bed. With care, she placed the puppies on the soft fabric, ensuring each one was tucked in and shielded from the cold. "You're safe now," Margaret whispered, her voice tender. She turned her attention to the mother dog, whose eyes followed her every move. Margaret rummaged through her pantry and found some leftover chicken broth. She warmed it on the stove and poured it into a shallow dish, placing it near the dog. "Here, try this," she encouraged. The mother dog sniffed the dish cautiously before lapping up the broth. Margaret watched with relief as the dog ate, her movements slow but determined. The puppies, sensing the warmth of the fire, began to stir, their tiny bodies stretched and shifted, their eyes blinking open for the first time since entering the house. Margaret couldn't help but smile. It had been so long since her home felt so alive. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Margaret reached for her phone and dialed the local veterinarian, Dr. Carter. "Dr. Carter, this is Margaret. I have a situation," she began, her voice trembling. She quickly explained what had happened: the discovery of the golden retriever and her puppies in the snow, their condition, and her decision to bring them inside. Dr. Carter listened attentively before responding, "You did the right thing, Margaret. I'll come by first thing in the morning to check on them. For now, keep them warm and hydrated. Do you have any soft food for the puppies?" "I think I can manage," Margaret replied, glancing at the little ones. "Thank you, Dr. Carter." After hanging up, Margaret turned her attention back to the puppies. She found a small dropper she used for baking and filled it with warm milk. Gently, she fed each puppy one by one, their tiny mouths opening instinctively to take the milk. "You're such brave little ones," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. As the hours passed, Margaret found herself immersed in caring for her unexpected guests. She cleaned their fur with a damp cloth, massaged their tiny paws to stimulate circulation, and checked each one for any signs of injury. The mother dog, whom Margaret had already begun to call Grace, lay quietly beside her puppies, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her trust in Margaret unwavering. Margaret sat back and looked at the small family nestled near the fire. For the first time in years, her house didn't feel so empty. The soft breathing of the puppies, the crackling of the fire, and the gentle presence of Grace filled the room with warmth and life. A smile spread across Margaret's face as she realized how much these animals had already changed her. In their vulnerability, she found a renewed sense of purpose. "This house was too quiet anyway," she said aloud, her voice tinged with humor. Margaret stayed up late into the night, watching over the family. She made sure the fire stayed lit, checked on the puppies, and stroked Grace's fur to reassure her. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the window, Margaret finally allowed herself to rest, sitting in her rocking chair and gazing at the peaceful scene before her. For the first time in a long while, Margaret didn't feel alone. Margaret's life had quickly shifted from quiet solitude to bustling activity as she cared for Grace and her 8 puppies. Every morning began with feeding the puppies, cleaning their makeshift bed, and preparing warm broth for Grace. Though the work was tiring, Margaret found herself smiling more than she had in years. Each puppy had a distinct personality, and Margaret lovingly gave them names. Sunny, the smallest yet most cheerful; Scout, the curious wanderer; Hope, who always seemed determined despite her fragility; Buddy, the loyal companion; Brave, the fearless protector; Luna, quiet and observant; Max, always playful; and Ruby, with her soft, reddish tint of fur. Naming them brought Margaret closer to the little family, and she felt as though her home was coming alive again. As the days passed, Margaret noticed the puppies becoming more energetic and playful, a sign that her care was helping them thrive. However, her joy was overshadowed by a growing concern for Grace. The once alert and watchful mother dog was becoming increasingly lethargic. At first, Margaret thought Grace was merely tired from her long ordeal in the cold, but soon it became clear that something was wrong. Grace began to eat less, her movements slowed, and her once shiny eyes grew dull. She spent most of her time lying by the fireplace, only rising when the puppies needed her. Margaret sat by her one evening, gently stroking her head. "You've done so much for them," she whispered, "but now it's your turn to rest." Despite Margaret's soothing words, Grace's condition continued to deteriorate. One night, as Margaret was preparing dinner, she glanced over at Grace and saw her struggling to lift her head. Margaret's chest tightened with worry. She knelt beside the dog, her hand trembling as she checked her breathing. It was faint but steady, a fragile rhythm that only deepened her concern. Margaret realized she couldn't wait any longer. Grace needed help, and she wasn't equipped to provide it on her own. With determination, she picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Carter's number. "Dr. Carter, it's Margaret," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you to come as soon as possible. Grace isn't doing well. She's weaker every day, and I'm afraid she won't make it without help." Dr. Carter's tone was calm and reassuring. "You did the right thing calling me, Margaret. I'll be there first thing in the morning to check on her. In the meantime, keep her warm and encourage her to drink water." Margaret hung up the phone and sat down beside Grace. "Help is coming," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. She gently lifted a bowl of water to Grace's mouth, encouraging her to drink. Grace lapped at the water weakly, her tired eyes meeting Margaret's with a flicker of gratitude. That night, Margaret stayed by Grace's side, her heart heavy with worry. As the puppies slept soundly in their blanket nest, Margaret kept the fire burning and whispered words of comfort to Grace. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We'll get through this together." Though fear gripped her, Margaret held on to hope. Tomorrow, Dr. Carter would arrive, and with his help, perhaps Grace would have a chance to heal. The morning arrived cold and grey, the world outside blanketed in snow. Inside Margaret's home, however, the warmth of the fireplace battled against the bitter chill. Margaret sat beside Grace, her hand resting gently on the mother dog's side, waiting anxiously for Dr. Carter to arrive. Grace's breathing was shallow, her body frail and motionless, except for the occasional twitch of her ears as the puppies stirred. Margaret's heart ached, watching the brave mother who had given everything for her pups now lie helpless. The sound of tires crunching on snow snapped Margaret out of her thoughts. She rushed to the door as Dr. Carter stepped out of his truck, his medical bag in hand. Dr. Carter knelt beside Grace, his expression serious but calm. "Let's take a look," he said gently, his hands moving carefully over the dog's body. He checked her heartbeat, breathing, and overall condition, while Margaret hovered nearby, her worry evident. "She's severely malnourished and dehydrated," Dr. Carter finally said. "Her body is worn down from stress and exhaustion, but the good news is that there's no underlying illness. With proper care, she should recover." Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What can I do for her?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. "She'll need high-protein meals, plenty of fluids and rest," Dr. Carter explained. "I'll give her a vitamin injection to help her regain some strength, but the rest is up to you. Keep her warm and don't let her overexert herself." Margaret nodded, absorbing every word. "I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Carter administered the injection, and Grace barely flinched. Margaret sat beside her, stroking her head and murmuring softly, "You're going to be okay, Grace. Just hold on." Once Dr. Carter left, Margaret got to work. She prepared a meal of boiled chicken and rice, mashing it into a soft consistency. Sitting beside Grace, she scooped small portions onto a spoon and carefully fed her. "Come on, girl," Margaret whispered. "Just a little more." Grace ate slowly, her movements weak but deliberate. Margaret stayed with her, encouraging her with gentle words and strokes, refusing to leave her side even as the hours dragged on. The puppies, too young to understand their mother's condition, provided a constant source of comfort. They snuggled close to Grace, their tiny bodies radiating warmth. Margaret marveled at their innocence and how they instinctively stayed near their mother, as if offering her strength. "You've raised such wonderful little ones," Margaret said to Grace, her voice thick with emotion. "They're lucky to have you." As days passed, Grace began to show small signs of improvement. Her breathing grew steadier, and she started lifting her head more often. Margaret celebrated each milestone, no matter how small. One evening, as Margaret sat by the fire knitting, she heard a soft sound behind her. Turning, she saw Grace struggling to her feet. Margaret immediately rushed to her side. "Easy, girl," she said, steadying the dog. Grace took a shaky step, then another, before settling back down near her puppies. Margaret's eyes filled with tears of relief. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "You're getting there," Margaret said, her voice filled with hope. As Grace grew stronger, Margaret couldn't help but reflect on the family's future. Her small home had become a sanctuary for the dogs, but she knew it couldn't be a permanent solution. The puppies were growing quickly, and soon they would need space to play and explore. Sitting in her rocking chair one night, Margaret gazed at the family nestled near the fire. Grace had given her everything, and now it was Margaret's turn to give them a chance at a better life. "They deserve more," Margaret whispered to herself, her heart heavy but resolute. Margaret resolved to speak with Dr. Carter about finding suitable homes for the puppies once they were old enough. Though the thought of parting with them broke her heart, she knew it was the right thing to do. With Grace steadily recovering, Margaret felt a sense of renewed hope. Her bond with the mother dog deepened, built on trust and shared determination. Every wag of Grace's tail and every playful bark from the puppies reminded Margaret of the resilience of life. Though challenges lay ahead, Margaret knew she would face them with the same unwavering love and care that had brought Grace and her family back from the brink. Together, they had fought for survival, and together they would find a way forward. The puppies grew quickly under Margaret's care. Once frail and timid, they were now lively bundles of energy, chasing one another around the room and filling the house with the sounds of playful barks and wagging tails. Margaret adored every moment of their antics, but she knew deep down that her small home couldn't be their forever home. Sitting by the fireplace one evening, Margaret glanced at Grace, who lay contentedly watching over her pups. "It's time, isn't it?" Margaret said softly, stroking the mother dog's fur. "They need families who can give them all the love and space they deserve." Grace's amber eyes met Margaret's as if she understood. The next morning, Margaret called Dr. Carter for advice. "I've been thinking about finding homes for the puppies," she said, "but I want to make sure they'll be with people who truly care for them." Dr. Carter's voice was reassuring. "That's a wonderful idea, Margaret. I can help spread the word, and I know a few families who've been looking to adopt. Let's work together to find them the best homes." Over the following weeks, Margaret began spreading the word in the small town. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about her story came to visit, each curious about the puppies and eager to help. Margaret welcomed each potential adopter into her home, watching closely as they interacted with the dogs. Her priority was ensuring that every puppy would be cherished and cared for. The first to leave was Sunny, the smallest and most cheerful of the litter. A kind young couple, excited to start their lives with a new pet, fell in love with her immediately. Margaret watched as Sunny wagged her tail and followed the couple to their car, a bittersweet smile on her face. Next was Max, whose boundless energy caught the attention of a family with 2 young children. Margaret couldn't help but laugh as the children squealed with delight, chasing Max around the yard. "He'll have so much fun with them," she thought, her heart aching but happy. One by one, the puppies found their new homes. Brave went to a retired firefighter who admired his strong, protective nature. Scout joined a local park ranger who promised to take him on countless adventures. Ruby was adopted by an artist who adored her unique reddish fur. Each goodbye was difficult for Margaret, but seeing the joy the puppies brought to their new families made it worthwhile. She knew she was giving them the chance to thrive in loving environments. The last to leave was Hope, the weakest of the litter, but with a determination that had captured Margaret's heart. Hope had taken longer to recover than her siblings, and Margaret had grown particularly attached to her. A woman named Sarah, who had recently lost her own dog, visited Margaret one day. She sat quietly beside Hope, speaking softly and gently, stroking her fur. Margaret watched as Hope, usually shy around strangers, leaned into Sarah's touch. "She's special," Sarah said, looking up at Margaret with a tearful smile. "I'd be honored to take her home." Margaret felt a pang of sadness but nodded. "I think she's going to love you," she said. As Sarah carried Hope to her car, Margaret stood on the porch with Grace by her side. "You're in good hands, little one," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Now the house was quiet again, much like it had been before Grace and her puppies arrived. But it wasn't the same emptiness Margaret had once known. Grace remained, her presence a constant comfort and reminder of the incredible journey they had shared. Margaret had never considered keeping any of the puppies. Her focus had always been on finding them homes. But Grace was different. The bond between them had grown unbreakable. Margaret couldn't imagine her life without the loyal, gentle dog by her side. "You're not going anywhere," Margaret said one evening as Grace rested her head on Margaret's lap. "You're home now." Margaret's life took on a new rhythm with Grace as her companion. Together they tended the garden, went on quiet walks through the forest, and shared peaceful evenings by the fire. The house, once a place of solitude, was now filled with warmth and love. Though Margaret missed the puppies, she found joy in the updates she received from their new families. Pictures and letters poured in, each one a testament to the happiness the puppies had brought to their new homes. Margaret would sit with Grace by her side, reading the letters aloud. "Look, Brave is already learning tricks," she'd say, showing Grace the photos, "and Max has a new favorite toy." Grace would wag her tail as if she too understood the joy of seeing her pups flourish. Though saying goodbye to the puppies had been difficult, Margaret knew she had made the right choice. Her heart swelled with pride, knowing she had given them the best start in life. And as for Grace, she had found her forever home, a place where she was loved and cherished, just as she had always deserved. Together, Margaret and Grace began a new chapter, one filled with hope, companionship, and the unbreakable bond they had forged through their journey. The house was quieter now, with the puppies settled into their new homes, but it wasn't the silence Margaret had once known. Grace's gentle presence filled the space with warmth, and Margaret found comfort in their companionship. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm. Yet something had changed. Margaret no longer felt alone. Grace became Margaret's constant shadow, following her as she went about her daily routines. Together, they tended the garden, now thawing under the approaching spring. The once barren flower beds began to bloom, mirroring the renewal Margaret felt in her heart. News of Margaret's journey with Grace and the puppies spread through the small town and beyond. What began as quiet whispers among neighbors soon turned into a shared tale of inspiration. People were moved by Grace's determination to save her puppies and Margaret's unwavering kindness in taking them in. Visitors began stopping by Margaret's house, bringing gifts for Grace, or simply to express their gratitude. Some brought bags of dog food, others blankets and supplies for Grace. Children left hand-drawn pictures of Grace and her puppies, which Margaret proudly pinned on her refrigerator. One afternoon, the town's local newspaper reached out to Margaret for an interview. Reluctant at first, she eventually agreed, realizing her story might inspire others to show kindness to animals in need. The article, titled "A Mother's Love and a Stranger's Compassion," brought even more attention to her story. Letters began arriving from strangers, thanking Margaret for her example of compassion and sharing their own stories of how animals had changed their lives. Margaret had always thought of herself as a solitary figure, but the outpouring of love and support from the community proved otherwise. Neighbors she had barely known began visiting more often, offering their help or simply stopping by for a cup of tea and a chat. One day, a group of children from the local school arrived with a surprise. They had built a small wooden sign that read, "Grace's Garden," and painted it with bright colors. Margaret couldn't hold back her tears as they placed it at the entrance to her garden. Grace, ever the calm and gentle soul, wagged her tail as the children took turns petting her. Margaret looked on, her heart full. Though she had spent much of her life in quiet solitude, Margaret now found herself busier than ever. Inspired by her experience with Grace and the puppies, she began volunteering at a local animal shelter. Her days were filled with cleaning kennels, feeding animals and comforting those who had been abandoned. The shelter staff admired Margaret's dedication, often commenting on how she seemed to have a natural way with the animals. Margaret, however, credited Grace. "She taught me everything about unconditional love," she would say with a smile. Grace often accompanied Margaret to the shelter, serving as a calming presence for the animals. Even the most nervous dogs seemed to relax when Grace was nearby, as if sensing her quiet strength. Margaret's story continued to resonate with people far and wide. She began receiving invitations to speak at local schools and community events, sharing her experience and encouraging others to show compassion to animals in need. At first, Margaret hesitated. She wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds, but Grace's steady presence gave her the courage to step out of her comfort zone. Standing before audiences, Margaret would tell the story of the snowy morning when Grace and her puppies appeared at her door. Her message was simple yet powerful. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life. Grace changed mine, and I hope her story inspires you to do the same. As time went on, Margaret's life blossomed in ways she had never imagined. Her days, once marked by solitude, were now filled with purpose and connection. The friendships she had formed and the bonds she shared with Grace brought her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Evenings were spent quietly with Grace by her side, the two of them enjoying the serenity of the garden or the warmth of the fireplace. Margaret often found herself reflecting on how much had changed since the snowy morning when Grace first entered her life. "You saved me as much as I saved you," she often told Grace, her voice filled with gratitude. Margaret's story became more than just a tale of survival and kindness. It became a legacy. The garden, now thriving with vibrant flowers and buzzing with life, stood as a symbol of renewal and hope. Visitors continued to stop by to meet Grace or simply sit with Margaret and hear her story firsthand. Each time, Margaret shared it with the same warmth and sincerity, always ending with a gentle reminder: kindness is a seed. You may not see it grow right away, but one day it will bloom in ways you never imagined. For Margaret and Grace, life was no longer about just getting through the day. Together they had found joy, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Their story served as a testament to the transformative power of love, reminding everyone who heard it that even the smallest act of compassion could make the world a brighter place. Margaret's story is a beautiful reminder of how love and compassion can transform lives. Just as Grace's unwavering devotion to her puppies led her to Margaret's doorstep, Margaret's selfless kindness gave Grace and her little ones a second chance. Through their journey, we see the hand of God guiding them, reminding us that His love works through us when we open our hearts to those in need. This story invites us to reflect on the small yet powerful ways we can live out God's will every day. Acts of kindness, whether caring for an animal, helping a neighbor, or simply offering a kind word, are reflections of His boundless grace and love. If this story touched your heart, let it inspire you to share that love with the world. Comment below and tell us how an animal or act of kindness has changed your life. Share this story with your friends and family to remind them of the beauty of compassion and faith. May God bless you and your loved ones abundantly. May He guide you to see His miracles in everyday moments and fill your heart with the joy of giving. Together, let's continue spreading hope, kindness, and God's light to every corner of the world. Thank you for watching.